The streetlights hummed faintly that night, casting long shadows over the quiet cul-de-sac where the Whitmore family had lived for generations. Their two-story home sat at the end of Maple Court, its white shutters neatly aligned, its porch swing still swaying gently from the wind that carried whispers through the oaks. Inside, the air felt heavier than usual, too still, too rehearsed. In the kitchen, a half-eaten dinner lay congealing under the amber glow of a single bulb. No one spoke. No one dared to. What the neighbors would later recall as an ordinary Sunday evening was in truth the night everything changed. A night when loyalty collided with morality, when blood proved thicker and darker than anyone could imagine. At 9:17 p.m., a muffled cry echoed through the walls. Moments later, a door slammed. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was panic. By morning, one family member would be missing, another drenched in fear, and the rest bound together by a decision that would haunt them for decades. It was the night the Whitmore family's secret was buried, and the truth was quietly exposed. Before we descend deeper into this haunting case, take a breath and look around you. How far would you go to protect the people you love, even if it meant living a lie? Let me know in the comments where you were watching from and whether you believe family loyalty can ever justify silence. Your thoughts help keep these stories alive, and your support ensures that the darkness behind closed doors keeps being brought to light. It began in the small town of Millhaven, Pennsylvania, a place that prided itself on quiet charm and old values. Everyone knew the Whitmores, the picture-perfect family that owned in Whitmore Hardware, the kind of small business that sponsored Little League games and gave free paint samples during community drives. Harold Whitmore, the patriarch, was a man of discipline and pride. His wife Diane, graceful but reserved, had long been the emotional glue of the family. They had two children, Matthew, the eldest, dependable, ambitious, and the heir to the business, and Rachel, the younger daughter who was as restless as she was intelligent. From the outside, the Whitmores embodied small-town decency, but behind their pristine windows lay tension that had festered for years, tension built on inheritance, control, and quiet resentment. When Harold fell ill in the fall of 2011, everything began to shift. He was only 62, but lung complications forced him into early retirement. That's when whispers began, about how the store would be handed down, about whether Rachel, despite her years away in Chicago, would return to claim her share. Family dinners grew colder, conversations shorter. Neighbors would later recall seeing Diane pacing the porch late at night, cigarette smoke curling through the autumn chill. And then came the weekend of November 12th, the weekend that would rewrite their history. Matthew called his sister that Friday. Reports from phone records show the call lasted only 42 seconds. It was short, abrupt, and ended with Rachel saying, "You'll regret this." By Saturday morning, she was back in town. The siblings hadn't spoken in months, not since Harold had quietly transferred a majority of the business shares to Matthew. Diane, ever the mediator, insisted they talk it through at dinner. She made Harold's favorite, pot roast and mashed potatoes, a familiar comfort for an unfamiliar unease. At exactly 8:30 that night, neighbors heard raised voices, a woman shout, then silence. Rachel was never seen alive again. When police were called 2 days later by a worried friend from Chicago who couldn't reach her, the Whitmores claimed she had stormed out after a family argument, that she'd packed her car and left for the city, but her car wasn't found in Chicago. It was discovered a week later, abandoned behind an old storage unit 5 miles from Millhaven, keys still in the ignition. Inside the car were two things that didn't make sense: her phone, wiped clean, and a single hardware store receipt signed by Matthew. At first, police treated it as a missing persons case. There was no body, no evidence of foul play, just tension and unanswered questions. But one detective, a 39-year-old named Aaron Bell, felt something off. He'd grown up in Millhaven. He knew the Whitmores by name. He remembered Rachel's laughter, her quick temper, and how she never left without saying goodbye. Bell started digging quietly. He asked around town, checked CCTV near the highway, but Rachel's trail ended that night. The family's story stayed consistent: an argument, an exit, nothing more. Then came a detail no one expected. A local farmer, clearing brush near the old creek behind the Whitmore property, found something wedged between the stones, a gold bracelet engraved with the initials RRW, Rachel's. When questioned, Diane claimed Rachel had lost it years ago. But the clasp was clean, no rust, no wear, as if it had only recently been dropped. Still, without a body, there was no case. For months, the investigation went cold. The Whitmores returned to business as usual, the town eager to forget what it couldn't explain. But Detective Bell didn't. He'd drive past that house on Maple Court late at night, headlights sweeping over the porch, wondering what was behind those drawn curtains. In June of the following year, tragedy struck again. Harold Whitmore died suddenly. Cardiac arrest, according to the coroner. But whispers began immediately, because the night before, Harold had reportedly told a friend at the VFW hall that he was finally ready to set things right. He never got the chance. After Harold's death, Diane and Matthew grew reclusive. They shuttered the store for a week, citing grief, but when it reopened, a new name appeared on the paperwork: Whitmore and Son Hardware. Rachel's name, once part of the family business, was quietly erased. Locals called it a tragedy that never healed, but others started calling it something else: a cover-up. Years passed. Millhaven moved on. But Detective Bell never forgot. In 2018, while reviewing cold cases, he reopened Rachel's file. Forensic technology had advanced. DNA databases were stronger. He re-examined the evidence: the bracelet, the receipt, the abandoned car, and requested a warrant to test soil samples from the Whitmore property. What they found exposed everything. Underneath a patch of disturbed earth behind the old greenhouse, a space Harold had fenced off before his death, they uncovered fragments of cloth consistent with what Rachel was last seen wearing. And inside that soil was trace DNA, a partial match to Matthew Whitmore. When investigators confronted him, Matthew remained composed. He said he'd helped his father bury old trash years ago, nothing more. But when they searched the basement, they found something far more telling: a metal lockbox, sealed with age, containing letters from Rachel. Letters that painted a very different story. In them, Rachel accused her brother of manipulating their father's will, of threatening her when she questioned missing funds. One letter ended with a chilling line: "If anything happens to me, look at Matthew." The case that had lain dormant for 7 years suddenly roared back to life. But what no one knew yet, not even Detective Bell, was that this family's secret wasn't just about Rachel's death. It was about who helped keep it buried. The morning the warrant was executed, Maple Court looked like something out of a dream gone wrong. Blue lights flickered against the white siding of the Whitmore home, illuminating faces that had hidden too long behind polite smiles. Neighbors gathered at a distance, their whispers blending with the sound of camera shutters and gravel crunching under boots. Inside, the air was thick, the scent of dust, old wood, and guilt. Detective Bell stood at the center of the living room, staring at the framed family photo above the mantel. Harold, Diane, Matthew, and Rachel, all smiling, all pretending. Matthew sat on the couch, hands clasped tightly, jaw set in a calm that looked almost rehearsed. Diane hovered near the window, her eyes darting between the officers and her son, as if watching history collapse in real time. When Bell placed the letters on the coffee table, neither of them moved. "You kept these hidden," Bell said quietly. Diane's voice cracked. "Those were private." "They're evidence," he replied. Matthew leaned forward. "You think you know what happened? You don't. My sister was out of control. She would have ruined everything." But his words trembled, and Bell noticed it. That was the first crack. The first moment where the weight of 7 years of silence began to press down. In the following days, forensic teams scoured the property. They unearthed more fragments: a rusted chain bracelet, a torn button, and traces of ash that suggested someone had tried, unsuccessfully, to destroy evidence years earlier. Every finding drew a sharper outline around what really happened that night in November 2011. Reports suggest that after the dinner argument, Rachel had confronted her father and brother over the altered ownership documents. Voices were raised. Harold tried to mediate, but things spiraled. A struggle followed: short, violent, final. Matthew claimed it was an accident, that she slipped, hit her head on the stone step near the back porch. But when forensics matched blood traces from a hammer found in the garage to Rachel's DNA, the story changed again. Still, the question that haunted investigators wasn't just how Rachel died, but why no one said a word for years. That answer came from Diane. During an interview that lasted over 6 hours, she broke. Her voice, once delicate and measured, fell apart into sobs that sounded more like confessions. She admitted that Harold had helped Matthew move Rachel's body that night, that he had insisted they protect the family's name. They buried her near the greenhouse, telling themselves it was temporary. Harold promised he'd go to the police when things calmed down, but he never did. And when he died, the secret became Diane's alone. "I thought I could live with it," she whispered during her recorded statement. "I thought if I just stayed quiet, the pain would fade. But it never did. It's there every night when I close my eyes. Every time I walk past her room." Her confession cracked the case wide open. News spread through Millhaven like wildfire. The Whitmores, once symbols of small-town success, became the center of national attention. Headlines read, "Family business, family buried." Reporters swarmed the quiet neighborhood, digging through years of seemingly ordinary life built on extraordinary deceit. Detective Bell later said that the hardest part wasn't finding the evidence. It was realizing how close he'd come to letting the case die in silence. "If you listen long enough," he said, "houses have a way of telling you what happened inside them." When the trial began in early 2019, the courtroom overflowed with spectators. Matthew appeared calm, his suit pressed, his voice steady. Diane sat behind him, pale and frail, eyes fixed on the floor. The prosecution built its case around the letters, the forensic soil evidence, and the confession. They argued that Rachel had discovered her brother's embezzlement from the family business and had threatened to expose him, a move that would have led to his ruin. Instead of facing that, he silenced her. The defense claimed a tragic accident and a family paralyzed by fear. They painted Diane as a grieving mother manipulated by guilt, not malice. But the jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they found Matthew Whitmore guilty of second-degree murder and evidence tampering. He was sentenced to 30 years in state prison. Diane, charged as an accessory after the fact, received a reduced sentence after her cooperation. 5 years, suspended after 2 for medical reasons. She served 18 months before being released on compassionate grounds. By the time she returned home, the Whitmore property had been sold. The hardware store had closed. The family name, once etched above the door in brass letters, had been replaced with a blank white sign. But the story didn't end there. In 2021, a series of investigative journalists revisited the Whitmore case for a documentary titled The Weight of Silence. They uncovered even more, that local authorities had received an anonymous tip in 2012 suggesting foul play, but it was ignored due to lack of evidence. The voice on the tape was distorted, but experts believed it belonged to Harold. He had tried in his final months to undo what he'd done, to expose what he'd helped conceal. That revelation recontextualized everything. Harold's death, once seen as natural, became a point of speculation. Some wondered if guilt had consumed him. Others whispered about suicide, though no proof ever surfaced. Detective Bell retired 2 years later, but the case haunted him still. In interviews, he'd glance at the camera, his tone softening. "There's something about family secrets," he said. "They rot from the inside. The longer you keep them buried, the deeper they eat into the people holding them." Millhaven never quite recovered. The Whitmore house stood empty for years, its shutters closed, its lawn overgrown. Children dared each other to step onto the porch at night, to peer through the dusty windows. Locals said that sometimes late in the evening, you could still hear a swing creak, as if someone unseen still sat there, waiting for forgiveness that would never come. When Diane passed away quietly in 2024, she left behind a single letter. It was addressed to no one in particular, but it found its way into the case archives. It read, "To the ones who will never understand, silence can be a kind of prison. I thought I was protecting my family, but what I really did was destroy it. If you ever find yourself holding a secret like mine, don't. The truth doesn't set you free, it just stops the bleeding." Detective Bell was the one who read that letter aloud at her burial. Only a handful of people attended. No family, no friends, just those who had once chased ghosts through the rooms of that house. And as the last handful of dirt hit the coffin, Bell whispered something that no one else heard. "She's finally exposed." Because in the end, it wasn't just about a daughter's death or a mother's silence. It was about the quiet corrosion of truth. How love can twist itself into fear, and how fear can turn into complicity. Every lie the Whitmores told had been built on one fragile promise. That family meant protection, no matter the cost. But protection became poison. And when the truth surfaced, it tore through everything they'd built. The business, the legacy, the illusion. Sometimes it's not the act of killing that destroys a family. It's the silence that follows. And in this case, that silence was finally shattered. The truth was exposed, but the damage was already done. In the end, we're left with one haunting truth. You can bury the past, but you can't bury guilt. It waits, beneath the soil, behind the walls, inside the hearts of those who swore to keep the secret safe. And when the time comes, it will rise, demanding to be heard. So ask yourself, if the person you love most committed an unforgivable act, would you tell the world or help them hide it? Because in Millhaven, that choice defined everything. If stories like this one resonate with you, stay close. There are still countless families across the world whose darkest truths remain hidden, waiting to be brought into the light. Help us continue uncovering them by sharing this story with someone who believes some secrets are better left buried. Because one day those secrets might just be exposed.